Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how to make a gum paste dahlia. I'll link to all the tools in the description below, and if you have any questions or any feedback, please leave them in the comments. To get started, I'm going to roll out a thin sheet of maroon colored gum paste on the pasta attachment for the KitchenAid to level 6. Dust my surface with a little cornstarch, and that helps keep everything from sticking. And then I'm going to use a 12-petal daisy plunger cutter, and I'm going to cut out 2 rounds and place them in a plastic wallet. I'm going to cut out all my petals actually and place them in here so that I can cut everything at once and keep them from drying out while I shape each layer of the flower. I'm going to cut between 12 and 15 petals per layer using sizes 2, 3, 4, and 5 on a dahlia cutter set, which again is linked in the description below. I'm going to start by taking one of the daisy cutouts and thin the edge using the large end of a ball tool. Then I'm going to take a Dresden tool and pull down from the top of the petal toward the center to create a slightly puckered effect. Once I do that, I'll lightly brush egg white all over the petal and wrap it around a polystyrene ball. The polystyrene is 1.5 inches and is mounted on an 18 gauge wire. I'll repeat this process with the second daisy that I cut out. This time, when I add the daisy, I'm going to leave little pieces of the petals sticking up so that it looks like the center is a little bit messy. I'm also using a piece of craft foam here to help me get the daisy wrapped around the ball. Makes it a little bit easier since there's so many kind of wiggly bits. Once I've got the daisy petals wrapped all the way around the ball, I'm going to use my Dresden tool to pull up some of those edges and make for a more realistic looking center. Then I'm going to pull out the smallest petals in the set that I just cut. I'm going to use the large end of my ball tool to go around and thin the edges, so half on, half off the petal, up and around, and then down the center to smooth it out. And then I'll use my Dresden tool, drag it from the top of the petal down toward the bottom, which is the narrow end, to make a pucker. And then I like to flip all my petals over and let them sort of par dry while I work on the other pieces, and I think doing that upside down helps them keep their shape. Then, using a little bit of egg white, I'll just put a dab on the very bottom of the petal and wrap the left side down and then the right side over that to create kind of a tubular cone shape. Once all the petals are shaped, then I'll draw a line of egg white around the middle of the ball and gently, lightly paint a little bit of egg white down toward the base. Then I'll place a layer of the petals on, leaving a small gap between, and then place the rest of the remaining petals in a second layer in those gaps. And I'll set everything aside to dry. Once it's dry, I'm going to repeat the process exactly like that for the second layer. Thinning the edges using the ball tool, folding down the bottom end of the petal to make that cone-like shape, and applying it in 2 parts to the flower center that we've got so far. At this point, you're going to want to let the flower dry for a few hours. There's a lot of egg white on there, a lot of gum paste. It's going to get really heavy, and it's going to make it a little harder for everything to stay together. So at this point, give it a couple hours, take a break, go have some lunch, do whatever you got to do, so that it par dries a bit, and as you work on the next, before you work on the next chunk of petals. Once all the petals are adhered, hook the base of the wire onto a rack and let the whole thing dry upside down for a little while. When you're ready to come back, we're going to start the process again the same way, but this time we're adding an additional step. We're going to also vein these petals. So we're going to thin them out, just like I'm doing now, using the large end of my ball tool. So we're going to thin them out using the large end of the ball tool. And before we make the indentation with the Dresden tool, I'm going to put them all into an extra large rose veiner. The one I'm using is from Sugar Art Studio, and it's for the giant rose. If you don't want or don't have this, you can just use a regular veining stick. And once the veining is done, then you're going to make your indentation with your Dresden tool the way you see here. And from here, it's the same process. So you're going to make the indentation with your Dresden tool, flip it over while you make the little cones out of the other petals. So just put a little bit of egg white down at the bottom, left over right, so that you have that conical kind of shape. Your flower's been par drying now, so you can pick it up off the rack where it's been drying and begin again. Add some egg white down on the bottom third of the flower, just a little bit. You don't want to make it too wet. And then put on a layer of petals, leaving a small gap between each one. You're going to create a second layer on top of that and place the remaining petals in those gaps. Then you're going to set it aside on a rack to dry. Now we're at the last stage of petal shaping. So we're going to take the largest petals and kind of stretch them and elongate them using the large end of the ball tool. So this is more than just thinning the edges. We're actually going to try and make the petal a little bit bigger here. Then you're going to place them in your petal veiner, press down so that they have that nice veining. I know this isn't a Dahlia specific veiner, but I think the shape of it works really well here. I'm going to take my Dresden tool and drag it from the top of the petal to the bottom to create that pucker line. And then I'm going to actually take the smaller end of my ball tool and run it around the edges. And this is going to create a little bit of ruffle, a little bit of frill, which you don't want it to be super frilly. You just want to have a little bit of wave so that as you apply these petals to the outside, in the same way you've applied all the other petals, it creates a little bit of movement. You're going to put on a layer of your petals, which will be about half of what you have. Let it par dry, and then shape the second half and apply those in the gaps with a little bit of egg white, just like all the other rounds we've done before. You'll also notice I'm not bothering to fold the base of the petals here to make that cone shape. Because this is the point in the flower where it's supposed to be fully in bloom, it's not going to have that sort of conical look to it. And once this part is complete, then we'll get to how we dry the flower, which makes a really big difference, because how you dry it really determines the final shape and how much sort of movement and life the flower itself has. So once you've got all your petals on, set it on the rack while you get your drying station set up. You're going to grab a coffee filter, a piece of bumpy foam, and your rack, and you're going to slide the wire of the flower through the coffee filter and through the bumpy foam. It goes through very easily. Then you're going to set the whole thing on top of your wire rack so that the wire, or the quote-unquote stem of your flower, is sticking straight down. It'll just make it easier. You won't have to worry about bending the flower and messing around with it while you're trying to dry things. Now we're going to take some just rolled up tissue paper. I've like twisted it into a log, and I put it around the base of the flower under the very outside layer of petals. And you can also see I'm using tiny foam wedges and little tiny pieces of ripped up paper towel, and I'm just placing them in between the layers of petals. I'm using the paper towel here to kind of prop those up and create a tighter look toward the center and a more open look toward the edges. At this point, your flower will need to dry for at least 24 hours. It's really important that it's thoroughly dry before you try to dust it. Now you'll see that I've got a side-by-side photo here. This is the same flower. On the left is before I've dusted it, and on the right is the flower after I've dusted it. So let me show you how I mix up this color. So I'm using crystal colors here. This is brick red, aubergine, and a little bit of burgundy. I also took out a little bit of cocoa, which I ended up not using because it was going to make it kind of too chocolatey looking, and I wanted it to have more of a rich, dark ruby color. So I'll mix a little bit together and then test it on the back of the flower to make sure I like it. And once it's at a place where I think it's a good color, then I will just use a fluffy brush and cover the whole thing. Front and back. Don't forget the backs of your petals, it's really important. It'll give the final flower a nice cohesive finished look. And a lot of times these flowers almost look like they have a little bit of a glow about them. So once I get this full base color on, then I'm going to go over the petals with a little bit of fuchsia, which I think is a Roxy and Rich brand. just on the centers of some of the petals. And you won't really notice it until after the flower is steamed. And once it's steamed, not only will the steaming help set the color and keep it from coming off on your cake or your hands or anything else, but it will help give a nice finish to the flower and pull through any of those layers of color that you've built up throughout that process. So you can see here, I'm just taking a little bit of fuchsia, dabbing it on those places, and then I'll finish up the flower by dusting the calyx, which I didn't take a video of me creating the calyx, but I just used a regular calyx cutter and adhered it to the back of the flower using a little bit of egg white. And I'm gonna color the calyx with two kinds of green from Crystal Colors, moss and kiwi. Just mix them together, and then using kind of a smaller stiff brush because it needs to be a little bit more detailed, brush the dust on the calyx, and then everything's dusted now. I'll steam it, and then once it's complete, the flower will be done and ready to go. So it'll need about 30 minutes to an hour to dry after steaming, and then you can add it to your cake or whatever beautiful arrangement you're making. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe. And again, all the tools will be linked in the description box below. If you have any comments, any feedback, I'd love to hear them. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks. Bye.